Great.
It's just pushing it through, still processing.
Mine, it says meeting is now streaming live on YouTube.
It is as of now.
Beautiful. Thank you. So we can begin? Great. So Tanis, we're all good to start then?
Yep.
Okay, beautiful. Greetings, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in. We had some technical issues, supposedly what we learned, and others have been experiencing doing like online organizing, is that like sometimes the bandwidth or the usage factor on some of these streaming platforms can be really taxed at high traffic times. And so sometimes it's hard to connect the different components tech-wise. So we're actually meeting as a panel internally via Zoom, and that's connected and was going to be connected via Facebook Live, but we're actually now doing YouTube. And then we're going to make sure that this video exists both on YouTube as a recording and also as a recording on Facebook where people can see it there as well. So we're hoping to get those uploaded later tonight. So if you have had any issues trying to see this, you know, or if you knew other people did, they can definitely watch it later. And then definitely encourage people to watch it now on YouTube. So hello, greetings. My name is Ahimsa Timoteo Baron. Tonight is Mobilizing Sovereign Movements, Native Treaties, Artistic Interventions, and Electoral Power. This is the first of 3 nights of dialogue. And I'm going to read the description of the event, and then I'm going to introduce our panelists, read the Tulsa Artist Fellowship Land Acknowledgement, talk a little bit about both Tulsa Artist Fellowship and American Indian Community House, who are the 2 organizations that are supporting this event. So first, the description of the event. Mobilizing Sovereign Movements, Native Treaties, Artistic Interventions, and Electoral Power is a diverse dialogue series with Indigenous womanist and Two-Spirit/queer/trans Indigenous leaders in Oklahoma and New York and across Turtle Island and the Pacific, engaging each other and our communities about intersections of Native sovereignty, gender, sexuality, the arts, and mobilizing electoral politics. Occurring over 3 distinct interlinked dialogues, the series is co-sponsored by the American Indian Community House in New York and Tulsa Artist Fellowship in Oklahoma. The series examines ongoing challenges faced by tribal nations and Native peoples in the wake of the McGirt v. Oklahoma decision and interwoven legal issues, such as the ongoing renewal of the intersectional provisions of the Violence Against Women Act, the Indian Child Welfare Act, American Indian Religious Freedom Act, Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, and Voting Rights Act, as well as the 2020 US Census and election, as they affect issues of sovereignty, violence, gender, sexuality, civil liberties, freedom of expression and assembly, representation, and human rights. The dialogue participants are Indigenous womanist and Two-Spirit/queer/trans Indigenous leaders in the arts, education, law, health, media, and environmental and social justice organizing. Gather with us to discuss how best to mobilize and creatively impact the election, these issues, and the future of our communities. So again, my name is Ahimsa Timoteo Baron. I'm a Tulsa Artist Fellow, and I also work with the American Indian Community House back home in New York. And I'm really grateful that these 2 organizations could come together to support this dialogue series. Tonight is the first night, and the dialogue series continues on for 3 nights. The next dialogue is going to be on this coming Monday, November 2nd at the same time, which is 6 p.m. Oklahoma time, 7 p.m. New York time, also known as 6 p.m. Central Time, 7 p.m. Eastern. So that's the time for this panel discussion tonight, as well as Mondays, and they're 2 hours long. And then the third panel discussion dialogue is going to be occurring post-election, the Saturday after the election on Saturday, November 7th. And that one is going to be at a different time. It's going to be in the afternoon, and that's going to be New York time or Eastern time, the same thing, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., or Oklahoma or Central Time, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. And I'll talk a little bit more towards the end of the event about who the other panelists are on those other nights to encourage you to tune into them. For tonight, I'm really honored to be gathering with 4 people here in Oklahoma. The first dialogue, just in terms of people's schedule and how it worked out, ending up being mostly an Oklahoma crew of folk who are going to be Oklahoma-based crew of folk talking tonight. The second dialogue is going to be a mix of Oklahoma-based folk as well as people elsewhere. And then the third dialogue is the one that's the most geographically diverse in terms of where people currently live. And we'll be bringing people from Oklahoma, bring together people who are based in Oklahoma, California, Hawaii, Vermont, and New York. So, and so that will be exciting, as well as Oklahoma. And so that will be exciting to see just how each dialogue is different. This project of this dialogue series was created with support by Tulsa Artist Fellowship and the American Indian Community House. Created by the George Kaiser Family Foundation, Tulsa Artist Fellowship supports both local and national artists while enriching the Tulsa community. The American Indian Community House, also known by its abbreviation AICH, is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization serving the needs of Native Americans residing in New York City. AICH was founded in 1969 by Native American volunteers as a community-based organization, mandated to improve the status of Native Americans and to foster intercultural understanding. One of the things that the Tulsa Artist Fellowship does at each of its events, whether they occur in person or during the pandemic online, is to read a land acknowledgement that talks about where and how, in what ways is the Tulsa Artist Fellowship located. So that land acknowledgement from the Tulsa Artist Fellowship is as follows. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life. Some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. And some fled Tulsa, never to return. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We are standing on the tribal lands of the Osage, Cherokee, and Muskogee Creek people. We honor their elders past and present. We are standing on the land of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. We pay respect to these victims and survivors, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement upon this land. Tulsa Artist Fellowship offers our care and commitment to acknowledging these truths and resisting injustice in all forms through intentional programming and artistic practices. I want to now move on to introducing our panelists for tonight. So our 4 panelists for tonight are Lydia Cheshawala, who is Osage, Cherokee, Dakota, Modoc, and Chicana. And Lydia Cheshawala is an artist, organizer, and consultant. Tara Moses is Tusekia Harjo Band of Seminole Nation and Muskogee. And Tara Moses is a playwright, director, arts producer, and advocate. Molly Murphy Adams is of Glala Lakota descent. And Molly Murphy Adams is a visual artist, art appraiser, and all-around maker of things. And then our last panelist is Aubrey Sode'en Ake'en Skeeter, who is Yuchi and Muskogee. And Aubrey Zode'en Ake'en Skeeter is an educator and language revitalization advocate. So please welcome each of our panelists. It's really great to be here with you, Lydia, Tara, Molly, and Aubrey. Some of you I've known for longer than I've been in Tulsa, from when I first came here during my recruitment visit back in 2018. That's when I first met both Molly and Lydia. And then I was blessed to meet both Tara and Aubrey last year in 2019. And it's been lovely to build with each of you in different ways, through the arts, through community, through being chosen family. in different ways. So I'm honored to be here with you. And yeah, so greetings, everyone. To start off, I'd like to just begin really organically to ask each of you, and you can go in whatever order feels comfortable for you. You can go popcorn style, to maybe just introduce yourself a bit, talk a bit about who you are and some of the work you do in this world. And after you've done that, if you could then also talk a little bit about, this has been a very intense year. There's been a lot going on. We've been dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. We've been dealing with ongoing and intensified oppressive violence and harassment and targeting of multiple intersecting communities of which we're a part. And we've also seen a definite environmental crisis that's been ongoing in terms of climate change. And we've also been dealing with the ongoing political and electoral crisis and challenges that we're currently involved in, as well as many other intersections. So one of the things I'd like for you to do as you talk about who you are a bit and some of the work you do in this world is, how has some of that work shifted in the past year? Like, how has the way in which you live your life or live in community or try and engage issues of the arts, of social justice, of community, of nativity, of sovereignty, you know, of the various things that are in the description of this event, any aspect of that that you might want to reflect on what some of those shifts have been and how have you been negotiating them? So whoever would like to start, that would be lovely. Thank you.
I know one of you wants to start.
Who's gonna take it away?
I can go.
Lydia will go.
I'll go. Yeah, so as Ahimsa, thank you for the lovely introductions. Has said, I am an artist, organizer, and consultant, which is a new title I'm claiming for myself in this post-COVID time. I would say that really actively for the last 4 years, I have been an educator within my community here in Tulsa, particularly within the femme community and other gender identities. And yeah, mostly I think I have been wanting to bring forward what's now being called Indigenous pedagogy, or at least in Oklahoma is now being called Indigenous pedagogy. But for me, it's just the way I was raised. But I've been trying to share that with the broader community and also outside of the Indigenous community, because I really have been seeing, one, in Oklahoma, something that is concerning to me, and it is the erasure of Indigenous identity in a state that is not only the end of the Trail of Tears, but is also holds one of the largest populations of Indigenous people in the United States, with Alaska being the other state that contains the highest voting population of Indigenous persons. And so I've been really wanting to bring awareness to kind of the ways that I was raised, the cosmology that my people have, the Osage people have, which is where I was culturally raised in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. And to share those, because I'm not saying I could see the future. None of us can. But I really did in 2016 kind of feel this coming on. When all of my peers were being like, it's never going to happen, I was like, I've got a whole like history that tells me otherwise. And a lot of us feel that way. And then it happened. And so I was like, okay, how do I move to, you know, this system of complete isolation, this system of individual excellence, and try and get my peers into this place of mutual aid right now, like to prepare ourselves for what I saw as the worst, and which has kind of proven itself to be, you know, that situation, the worst, in my opinion. I mean, I guess it could get much worse. Let's not hold any space open for that, though. But yeah, to move into these ideas of what does mutual aid look like? What does it look like to be considering ourselves as relation or in relationship? And also, what does non-monetary equitable exchange look like? I think in a lot of our groups, that's just called gift culture, and it's what we do. So yeah, I was really interested in doing those things, and I was doing a lot of advocacy work and really not getting anywhere with that. And maybe I was getting somewhere, which is blacklisted, which is put on a do not hire list. And so I basically realized, like, moving forward, I'm always going to be an educator. I'm always going to be an advocate. But post-COVID, the language I'm choosing now is consultant, because I used to give away all that information perspective for free to these institutions. And I've just realized that, no, I have expertise and I'm a consultant, and like, you should want me because I'm offering a perspective that's like not found in these places. And I've been doing that work, at least in this community, for 4 years. And so that's kind of the pivot I've been making, is to just really kind of step into the power of, I am an expert of my own experience. And I have valuable knowledge that comes to me through my culture and through my elders. And that means a lot. And I think it will help us move forward. So just a title change, really. And I think my artwork changed as well, but you know, we can get into that. I'll let someone else kind of jump in now.
Anyone else dying to go next? All right, I'll go. Lovely to be here and to visually meet all of you. My name is Molly Murphy Adams. I'm a visual artist, mostly fiber art. I joke, but it's not a joke, that I bead everything, and it is a non-funny joke maybe. And so everything I do in visual arts has a basis in beadwork and in the different geometric forms and traditions that come through that. I am tribally Oglala Lakota, but I was raised almost entirely in the Salish, Kootenai, Pend Oreille area and reservation in Western Montana. And that's really my home. And I think probably most people think that's where I'm from because I've been there for so long. Except that 10, 11 years ago, I was already looking at Oklahoma from Western Montana, from being from there for 4 generations, and thinking, where would I relocate to that might have a semblance of a living wage and an opportunity to raise my daughter in a place that still had Native community and a little bit of urbanity, but not too much. And I started meeting artists from Oklahoma, and it was bizarrely intriguing, because other natives in other parts of the country have this idea that even if it's not true today, that Oklahoma is a place you're forced to, not the place you voluntarily go to. So I had to convince a lot of people from back home that no, it really was a good idea to give it a whirl. So since then, I've been a mom and a stepmother, and living here in Oklahoma and learning what so many other peoples before me when they came to Oklahoma learned, that it is incredibly difficult to be a person, a culture of one, a person, a group, a people, to be so entirely rooted in a landscape and then to remake yourself in a new landscape with new rules and new botanical species and new animals and new weather patterns and all of these new things. And I don't think I knew how rooted I was in that place till I came to this new place. And I think going through that process helped me understand a lot of communities here and what that journey has been, to be a people rooted in landscape and in place, and to be uprooted and then to remake yourself and your people in a new place without disconnecting, and to remake that connection and to add to identity rather than losing it. So that's been my process as both an artist and a person and a gardener, and someone who delves into a lot of gardening and pickling and growing and trying to collect and redeem indigenous species and one compost pile and indigenous flower at a time as I reclaim suburban yards in ways that my neighbors do not appreciate.
Yes.
So post-COVID, pre to post-COVID, this was going to be my breakout year. My oldest finished grad school in the spring. My middle son moved to New Zealand to play pro soccer March 8th. Crazy serendipitous move. And my youngest was, as of January, in the middle of her freshman year of college. So I had coasted into post-caretaker mode and was very, very excited at all the new freedom I was going to have to go wherever I wanted and do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. I was going to go to restaurants and meet up with people and do social organizing and stuff that I had not been able to do as both a parent caretaker and a child caretaker. So that's gone great. That has, so this is my breakout year. And I really kind of crawled into my shell artistically because I, as a bead worker, I also feel like I work under some constraints that in a way we're supposed to have good intentions when we sit down and work. And it's really hard to do that in a state of semi-panic. And because I also have a strong background in science, in particular virology and epidemiology, I felt like I saw it coming before it, and it was like powerless to express it to people or to communicate it. And as Lydia was saying about 2016, which I also experienced, I am not a stakeholder in American exceptionalism. And so I believe that whatever can happen will happen. And it's proven over and over. So this year I really augured in and kind of made very little beadwork in anticipation or a lack of anticipation of what was to be. And really still don't know if, how I feel long-term about the art I make and about the bandwidth I take up. So mostly I've tripled my garden space, making even more pickles and more food and more stuff. It's like, herbs and flowers and seeds and gourds. And
as someone who's eaten a lot of that food, I wasn't just like celebrating the domestic in that way, but more like the deliciousness that has been bequeathed upon me. So I just want to be really clear. I still maintain the gender critique of that, but yeah. But
all right,
We
I could
stand
go on
food
and on.
sovereignty.
Yeah, food sovereignty and also botanical sovereignty of reclaiming space for those species. And that's none of those things I do as part of any organization. It's just a personal ambition.
yeah, and one of the things that's been very kind, and I might intentionally just say things not to take over in any particular way, but like just to honor the ways in which we know each other. Like Molly like so many people have extended kindness to each other during this very challenging year. And one of the ways that Molly has done that is because she knows I live by myself and we both have we respect each other's ethics and integrity in a variety of different ways, including how we handle the pandemic. And so she's like, you live by yourself. And I know that can be really intense. And our studios are right next to each other as well. She's like, would you like to be the external member of our pod? So she's welcomed me into that. And so in that way, I'm quarantining together at a distance, and sharing in that. So to actually have home cooked food from someone else during this time when you don't live with someone, and you get to also maybe go over and dog sit or fish sit or, take care of things. And I'll share one brief thing because I think Molly was having a little bit of a tech thing, or maybe I had to step off for a second, but just to honor her and the connection, and to talk about what this year has been like about 2 months into the pandemic, I was over at her home and sitting in the backyard with her and her daughter, who was home from college due to the pandemic. I was sitting there, and it's my first time, I think, in a while that I've been over at her home. And Molly's coming back into the space. Ma, if you can hear me, I'm just talking about you for a moment, honoring our friendship and connection, and this in light of the
Missed it.
pandemic. So it's still going on. I'll wrap it
Sorry,
up though.
power cord issue.
No problem. Yeah. But I was saying how your kindness and generosity of making me,
Aw.
your family making me an external member of your pod, and what has that meant? And then I was just being to share the story of sitting in the backyard that one time with you and your daughter. And so I was over at her place, and I'm sitting there in the backyard with her and her daughter, who's home from college due to the pandemic. And I'm sitting there for at least an hour, and I'm feeling weird. Like I don't know what's in my body. Like there's this emotion I can't name. And I'm there, I'm sitting, I'm looking out at her gardens, looking out at the beautiful land, the trees blowing in the wind. And then I realized after about an hour, I don't know what I said. I might have cussed. I don't know. I was like, whoa. And she's like, what? I was like, I just realized what I've been feeling for the past hour. And I described that thing I couldn't name. And I said, I just realized what it is. I feel safe. And I said, I hadn't felt safe in someone else's territory, in someone else's space, being in someone's home. This had been my first time in 2 months that I'd go over to another loved one's home. And to be welcomed with food, to be welcomed there into home, to have that kind of space of not just waving from a distance with your mask on, someone in the hallway of your apartment building, to actually like be in someone's home. I hadn't done that. And I'm so used to being in people's homes and cooking for them, or them cooking for me, or having tea, or being in each other's studios, or just being human with each other. And that I was so not used to feeling it that I couldn't even identify this sense of safety and of release and being able to breathe and to see nature without being concerned, am I going to bump into someone in their airspace, or not even just them into me, but me into them, or, like, because sometimes when you're just walking by in a park or something, there might be a bike lane, and then there's the inertia of fast moving white bodies that might run you over or something. So you're just sort of, okay, I'll get out of the way. And so within that, to feel that was profound. And then later, at the end of the day, getting a hug, and I was like, are you sure? And it was the first hug I'd had in 2 months, and like, what does it mean with so many of our loved ones and some of us being isolated when we don't have the basic physical affection of friendship even, or of family ties when we're separated from our loved ones? So I just wanted to honor you in that way, because in addition to your brilliance in terms of scientific and artistic and embodied cultural knowledge, one of the reasons, both with you and the other sisters here, is that I love you all for your ethics. I love you all for the way in which you build and engage community, the way you think through things and live in loving ways. And so I just wanted to honor that while you were off camera for a bit. And
Thank you.
yeah, so I didn't want to, feel free to go where you were talking about some of the shifts of this year. I didn't know if you wanted to come back or say some additional things in terms of shifts in your work over this year, because I think you were also talking about sort of the nature of your work.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that I would add, that I was going to add on to the end of that before I give us some space to move on, is that one of my other really big concerns this year was that, and I kind of alluded to the word bandwidth, that I sometimes will, I've never met a sword I don't want to fall on, but I think we're all very concerned long-term with the artistic community, and that in the past, I think there's been an assumption that while artists might make a bargain to not be compensated very much to do what they love, that maybe, okay, it's a bohemian lifestyle and a poor lifestyle, but you'll get by with some hustle and good luck and community. And I feel like this year has proven how flimsy of a structure that was, and how flimsy of an excuse it was to not compensate those people who provide our art and our music and our stuff. And because of the support of my husband's income, I know that we will get through this regardless of whether or not I sell a few more pieces or whatnot. And so I made a really conscious decision early on to step out of the bandwidth as far as any money or grant applications or anything like that was concerned, and to not pursue selling my work or promoting my work in any way that wasn't towards just pure exhibition, because I really felt like this is a moment where people are going to sink, where they've been barely keeping their nose above water, and this is going to be it. And that the only way I could do, besides monetary help to individuals, is to get out of the way and to boost the bandwidth of those people who are in a spot where they have less support than I do, frankly, and to get out of the way so that if I need to promote their Patreons or their Etsy shop or whatever it might be, but to get out of that way while I think the collective budget is limited, I feel like that's what I would want to do, is to get out of the way. And some of that has made me question an ongoing role in the future in the art community, and what do I want that to ethically look like, and what does it mean to, as a visual artist, to rely on a system that validates our work and our effort and our success through cash. And how dangerous that is if we get that taken away from us through large events or just through shifting trends, whatever, that we have to decide where we fit in that and what we want out of it. And it's been especially poignant to me to have a daughter in art school and to be trying to model for her what I would hope a young artist would soak up. That just because somebody gives you cash, that really should have almost no bearing on what you decide to do, nor should the absence of it. And so trying to figure out where I fit in that system, how I would support other people in that non-system, and what kind of a system we could build that would be better than that. Better than people, waiting, selling stuff on the sly, $20 at a time.
Yeah.
Now I'm done.
For anyone who's, both for our panelists and anyone who is tuning in now or saw another name appear, in addition to Tanis Parento, Ty Defoe is here as staff to assist on the back end with other things, and is another amazing staff member at American Indian Community House in New York. So thank you for being here, Ty, in that way. And maybe we'll see Ty at the end of the evening when we mention some additional events and programming here. So I just wanted to, if you saw a new name and like, who's that person showing up? It's someone from the American Indian Community House like Tanis. So just wanted to let you all know. So thank you so much for sharing, both Lydia and Molly. Yeah, Aubrey or Tara, would either of you like to share next?
I can go. I just wanted to also honor Molly. She, at the very beginning of the pandemic, was making a lot of masks and actually gave me quite a few for my family. And those were probably the first set that we had before we started like making and purchasing our own, which I think here in Oklahoma has been a really difficult thing, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. I think Molly gave those to me like probably very early April, like a couple weeks after like everybody had been inside. And so that, of course I've seen masks increase over time, which has been great, but that's a whole different thing. But I wanted to honor Molly in that way, just because that was something that was really important for us. And both of my parents are very high risk, and my dad is diabetic. Most of my family, I think a lot of us can relate to this, is very high risk when it comes to coronavirus. And so that's been a source of, I don't want to say paranoia, but high anxiety. I actually just found out today, I have my best friend just caught coronavirus. He's also Native, lives a couple of blocks away from me. His whole family, my uncle is hospitalized. Like, it's a lot going on and processing every day. But I also want to stop real quick with that and do my Yuchi introduction. So, Fasin, so de enoke SAT, Glimpo Hedo Chine, Shanuna Hedishtini, Ozidenechi Senle, Senle Asota. So my Yuchi name is Ode Inake, and my English name is Aubrey Skeeter. And I'm honored to be here with you all. And also kind of jumping off Molly and talking about bandwidth and things. Social media has been really interesting with that, I think, through the pandemic, just because we've really been at home, we've been with our devices, we've seen these different things. I actually, during protests in June, found Lydia's Instagram before I had met her via Zoom with Ahimsa towards the end of July. And so before I even knew I was engaging with this person now who I'm on this panel with, like, it's a bizarre thing. And also thinking about social media in different ways, especially in terms of the election. I follow quite a few radical Indigenous folks on social media, and it's been really interesting and concerning to see a lot of different opinions. And I respect everyone's opinions and their choice as to whether or not they vote. But that's just something I kind of wanted to bring up with this panel and everybody's how they've been handling that, I guess. That's been something I don't really know how to react. I just graduated in 2019 and from my undergraduate program, and I was planning on going into a master's program this fall. That did not happen. And I'm living here in Oklahoma in the Muskogee Reservation with my family. And do a lot of work with language. My father is a Muskogee speaker, and he teaches at our local high school. And I was just working with the Yuchi Language Project. I'm not with them anymore. And so working with language through this pandemic and working on Zoom with kids and just the high stress of learning, I think at this time is also something that's been really interesting. And my mother actually just recently graduated as well and is a first-year teacher. So this year has been wild in our household. And I think my ways of engaging with art have become more, I think, strained because of social media and kind of feeling like right now I can't really share in the ways I would like to share with a lot of people, because I feel like a lot of my art in the past couple of years has almost been coming through more with my like cooking, and those are just things I like to do. And so like we were talking about, like sharing meals and different things, recently I decided I needed to share something with my family. Like I have to show them something. Like I've been thinking about them, I haven't been able to see them. Some of my family has been making choices to get together in gatherings, and they know my conscious decision to not do that because I love them so much. I don't want to expose them, with both of my parents being teachers and being high risk. So I don't want to expose the rest of my family if I don't absolutely have to. I don't know. I'm sounding kind of all over the place. I think just because really this is just my genuine feelings of this is the pandemic. Like I think this is living a life whenever you've been inside for, what is this, going on 9 months at this point. I actually just saw my doctor the other day, and she really gave me a lot of validation for folks who have been inside and working from home and doing these different things. There has been a lot of she called it like penalties to that, and I mean it's very true, and I don't think it was something that any of us, I don't know. I want to stop with that one. I think I also resonated a lot with what Lydia and Molly were saying in terms of kind of feeling and knowing like what was going to happen. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, it became really clear what was going to happen, especially in living in Oklahoma. And I live in a suburb. And so it's not mandated by the Tulsa County, by the city of Tulsa mask mandate. And so I've been calling local officials asking why certain civil service people are not wearing masks in different things, and like hearing different things of this spreading throughout our city. And it's just, it feels like a lot. It feels like a lot. And it feels intimidating. And I think the best way that I've been able to stay grounded is, I think, through film and through cooking and doing as much language work as possible, but also being gracious in the sense of this is such a high stress time, understanding basic human biology that like high stress does not equate with the best of learning. And to kind of loop back to the learning I was just talking about, it's really kind of heartbreaking to watch my parents who are teaching like K through 12 age students, and just kind of hearing them say like, I don't think these kids are getting much. I don't know if they're able to like, they're not, some of them just aren't getting anything at all. And it's hard. And my mother, being a first year teacher, was recently talking to me about some students and behavior issues and different things like that. And then we had to have a real heart to heart of saying, imagine if you were 11 years old and going through this and not being able to fully understand everything that's going on, because I'm 24 and I can't keep up with everything. So that was a little all over the place, but I appreciate the time and being here and being able to connect with everyone. And yeah.
So,
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry. Someone else
oh,
going to
no
say something?
problem. I was like, ready. Yeah, so Mado Hische, Tara Chief Kados. So hello everyone. My name is Tara Moses. She, her, hers are my pronouns. Also calling from the Muskogee Creek Reservation. Yeah, so excited. Anyway, I'm calling also from like what was formerly known as Tulsa proper. So yeah, which is a time. Anyway, yeah, and so just a little bit about my work. So my medium is in the like theatrical performing arts. I'm a director, a playwright, also a dramaturg, a producing artistic director of a theater company here in Tulsa called Tila Tulsa that specifically serves Latino, Native, and Indigenous artists and their stories. I am also a co-founder and consultant of Groundwater Arts, which is not an international, is a national collaborative of citizen artists. And we move the like theater and arts and cultural fields towards climate justice, which we define as climate justice is racial justice, is disability justice, is economic justice, is decolonization. So all of that, because that all is climate justice. What else do? I do a lot of things, a lot of other organizations, but very much it's just in that realm of, as it was so lovely put earlier, between like directing, playwriting, producing, and then advocacy work, which is all of those are deeply intertwined. Yeah, so in regards to like the long list of topics at hand, and then also how long 2020 has been and all that that's involved. In regards to like changes in work, what I found really interesting, like, you know, ruminating on that question, is that my work hasn't changed. It's the delivery has changed. And so about 7 years ago, whenever I started working in the theater professionally, all of my work was centered around sovereignty, around advocacy for like around Native issues, around the Indian Child Welfare Act, around the Violence Against Women Act, all of the above, literally. And then like even with climate justice, also with doing work digitally through Zoom. Luckily started doing that in early 2016. So I felt real prepared for 2020 when the entire theater industry shut down. So I felt real prepared for that. Anyway, yeah. And so for me, I have never like separated my art from my people and from my community's needs. They've always been intertwined. I use like theater as a medium for action taking. And so every single play I've ever written, every single play I've directed has had some call to action. And some of them I'm really proud of. Like, as an example, in the summer of 2018, I was part of a show here in Tulsa, and the piece that I wrote and directed was about changing Columbus Day in Tulsa. And from there, I gave out, Mr. GT's phone number, his email to entire audiences, wrote up letters that folks could copy and paste, edit if they want to. And that was a daily campaign to harass him to change it. And at the height of that campaign, we had 300 people a day who were doing it, which was really great. And I'm really proud to say that that contributed to that change that happened in 2018 that year. And so, like, theater itself isn't just how I view it, isn't just this, you come to, you experience some sort of story, and then you go home. That's very much within the Euro-colonized way of telling stories, which I don't subscribe to. Anyway, and so I use theater as a vehicle for change, especially because we as Native people, like, we've been telling stories for as long as the sun's been in the sky. So this is what we do. And then that advocacy has also translated into the theater itself. And so during this time in 2020, I found myself doing tons and tons of decolonization training for the theater, tons and tons of anti-racism training for the theater. Just got an email during this panel, like, to confirm anti-racism training for theater in New York in the spring. Anyway, so it's just like constant. And also thinking about national movements in the theater that I'm fortunate enough to, like, support and continue to push forward advocacy wise, such as, like, the We See You White American Theater. I'm really proud of my involvement and support of that, which is really great. But yeah, and so, but what I will say has shifted in 2020 that I'm actually really thankful for now that I think about it, besides the fact that all my theatrical work is via the Zoom now. But with that is now so deeply accessible, because beforehand, again, I write from my family's perspectives, and before this year, because it was available digitally, not a single one of my family members has ever seen any of the work I've ever done. And all of my work is inspired by our community, by our culture, and just by our stories. And so that has been so lovely and so great to have. But what has changed is that before 2020, actually early 2020, I was stuck in Colorado when everything shut down, and then I had to rent a car and then drive back since my third leg of my trip got canceled. Anyway, is that before this year, I would spend probably half of my time here, and then the other half of the time somewhere else nationally, doing theater, consulting, doing this, that, and the other. But now this is like the longest period of time that I've just been at home. I think since like 2015. I think this has been the longest amount of time that I've been at home. And I'm really thankful for that, because now I feel like I can really tap into supporting folks here on the front lines. And so again, like following McGirt, I was able, in regards to like the EPA decision, which is again blatantly violating our tribal sovereignty, be able to connect with folks locally about how can I support, what can I write, what can I do. Starting the year with a local campaign against red face in the theater. And for those who are unfamiliar, that is casting non-Native people as Native roles. That also includes darkening people's skins and features to look more like Disney's Pocahontas, which it's lots of reasons not okay. I can go on and on about that all day long. Anyway, so able to really work on that, and then as well as use like Tila Tulsa as a fuel of giving support to local artists who need it, who have been disenfranchised because of the theater shutdown. I mean, I myself lost multiple productions and multiple thousands of dollars, but also recognizing that because of all the work that I've done in my multi-factor, like, I'll be okay. And so being able to then create opportunities to hire more folks, and especially Native folks and Native artists who may not have a day job or who may not have other this is terrible, but like other tapped markets they can tap into, revenue streams, there we go, has also been really great. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot we're going to talk about today, but I'll leave it there. So thank you, Miguel.
Thank you so much. We're definitely going to be having certain questions that I'm asking of the panelists tonight. And then also, like, as themes come up, I might just like also shift towards that. And then at a later point, we'll be opening it up to our audience, see if they have questions. So Aubrey, you mentioned something that you said that you wanted to sort of maybe hear from people a bit tonight. And I think it was, you can re-articulate it better than I can, but I think it was sort of maybe differences along political spectrum and engagement or not vis-a-vis electoral politics. So could you sort of like bring up a little bit more in depth, like what you were wanting to maybe talk with us about tonight? Yeah.
So I follow on Instagram. I don't know if this is an experience that everyone has had, but growing up, I always heard from my elders. And so I've always thought it. We've been at the ceremonial grounds or we've been at different ceremonies. And they would say things to me like, electricity's gonna stop. Like they would say things to me that like, you know how to do this. Like you've grown up out here and you've done these traditional things your whole life and you will be okay whenever these things happen. And then they've also always told me you walk in two worlds. They've always told me these things of like duality and understanding that like having a connection with nature and having connection like with our like traditions and these different things will aid us in different forms of our life, which of course I've seen manifested through different opportunities. But so through that, I've always thought, you know, maybe, I don't know whatever is going to happen in the world, but at least I have these skills. And so I've always been very interested in different ideologies of government and these different things. And I follow I follow a lot of like pedagogy of the oppressed and these different things. And so that's led me down this rabbit hole due to social media, you know, kind of tracking what we do. It's led me down this rabbit hole to these different accounts that are more communist leaning. And there's a lot of Native folks on there that I appreciate a lot of the work they do, a lot of community work. And so I believe in a lot of things they do. And I've also found out within the past week or two that a lot of these people are very against voting. And they're very much in the field of no matter what oppressor we vote for, it's still an oppressor. And so that's where I kind of wanted to have this conversation. Because I don't really know how to respond to it because it's the truth. And I understand that. And I also understand that voting in local elections is very important. I also just worked last year was the Muskogee Creek election, and I was working for a candidate, and that election, if anyone followed that, was in all honesty a mess. There was 2 primaries. It was an absolute mess. And there was a lot of slander. There was so much going on, and it really disheartened me to see my own community members doing this to each other, watching them do this to each other, and then watching them put out these different ads. And I was getting our opponents' ads and all these different things. And since I was working on the campaign, I was going to all of the meetings and seeing these different things. And I can understand, I guess, to a degree why people are disheartened, because there is now a person elected and I have tried to hold them accountable to many different things, and I have heard nothing. I've been trying to follow up on an issue with the Creek Nation for 2 months at this point, emailing weekly, some weeks every single day, and have heard nothing. And so I understand to a degree why people have gotten to this point of not believing in anything. And in my opinion, the voter turnout for the United States is only in maximum the mid 50s range, and in other countries it's in the 90%. And if we don't give it a full try, I don't know how you could fully knock it. But that's just my opinion. I would just really like to hear other people's thoughts on that, and understanding that, yes, we live in a colonized society, and many of us here on this panel are descendants of some of those colonizers too. And it's just a complicated thing, I think. But yeah, it's a succinct question.
No, I feel all of that so
Thanks.
deeply, because I also have seen, the both of the kind of rhetorics and reasons, and I agree with both. I'm certainly on the side of I believe we should vote, but I don't think voting is something that we should necessarily call sacred.
Mm-hmm.
No.
So I don't feel like voting is sacred if we're voting in an oppressor's system. I think that voting is a tool useful inside of an oppressor's system. And so something I do want to say is last year in September of 2019, I had the great privilege through some connections I have here, primarily through Matriarch, which is an Indigenous women's group, open also to Two-Spirit, non-binary folks. They have a chapter in Oklahoma City and also in Tulsa. And so through one of the organizers, Sarah Adams Cornell, I was linked up with David Wilson in Oklahoma City. And David is part of the basically Census 2020 for Native America and voting. And David received grant money funding through the National Urban Indian Family Coalition to get training. And so this was held at the NAIA Center in Seattle? No, Portland.
The Native American Arts and Cultures Foundation?
The NAIA? The NAIA is, let me look up what their acronym actually stands for.
And also, Lydia, I think your video froze a little while ago when you were just about naming the local organization that had a chapter. So I don't know if you did name it, but it froze just for literally just 2-3 seconds. So if you did, thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge that organization, which does such important work. And so can you describe it again in case people missed the context of it? What is Matriarch? Can you just
Matriarch is an organization for Indigenous women and Two-Spirit, non-binary folks to basically reconnect with our cultures, to engage in some, I guess, panlateral or multi-tribal community. And they also take on several issues. So they take on domestic violence, they take on missing and murdered Indigenous persons, they take on sovereign schools. I mean, they really are doing the work. But so through them, I was connected to this funding. And the NAIA Center is the Native American Youth and Family Center in Portland. Really, really beautiful institution. I suggest everyone check it out if they haven't. It was my first time being there. And I was like, wow, somebody's already made the vision. It's beautiful. But one of the things I learned when I was there, which, and by the way, even though this was a training for Native Americans, this was funded by Asian Americans. So there was already some pan movement, bilateral type things happening. They've had a lot more time to build that, I think, than we have in Oklahoma, a lot more stability to build that than we have here in Oklahoma. And one of the first things that they said in our training is that the majority of racism happens in policy. And I think that that's really important, and we really need to take in the fullness of what that means. The majority of racism happens in policy that affects housing, redlining, whether you can vote or not. The big issue for Native America with the census in particular, which we need to be counted on the census in order to get money to then use towards policy that affects us. That's how it all goes together in the system. And traditionally, we have not been able, not in Oklahoma, really, because in Oklahoma, you know, we're not reservations. Technically we might be, but we got also broken to allotment. And so there's also so much nuance there, even with the McGirt decision. And so outside of Oklahoma, the issue was that if you're on a reservation and say you don't have an address, then they don't have a way to count you. That used to be the way. They've changed the census now so that if your home is shared with another family, or if your home is on that dirt road that you like drive 5 miles past like the crooked tree, now they have it so that the census takers can actually take that in their notes on the system that says, to reach this house, you drive 5 miles past the crooked tree. Like, so that's really important for us, that the system has changed for us to be able to be counted in the first place, because we weren't being counted. The other big thing that I learned in that is that Oklahoma and Alaska, our two states, both have the highest concentration of Indigenous persons eligible to vote in the nation. And that if alone in our two states, we were to vote in full force, we would turn our states over, and we would also be able to make decisions for the entire Turtle Island, basically, off of that vote. And so I think both those things are really good things to be aware of when we're thinking about whether or not to vote. As far as not wanting to vote because, like, yeah, do we expect our oppressors to be our saviors? Not wanting to vote because voting isn't sacred, not wanting to vote because we've been raised with the belief that one day this world will walk on and we'll still be here. I think all of those are valid too, but I think at a point as critical as this, like, those can be as valid as possible, and they're not going to save our ancestors, save our children, save our futures, save our friends right now. And to me, that's also something really important to look at. I mean, I think I've seen a lot of people calling for the revolution. And with as much as, like, there's part of me that's like, yeah, I'm going to team carry this guillotine to the White House. There's also the part of me that's like, is my community ready for war? Because I know how hard they come for us. We have already experienced genocide once, and are we ready? To me, I think the best thing to do is vote, and then let's put our money in our communities. Like, to me, that's really powerful. Is if we don't want to be part of these systems, then yeah, let's be sovereign. Let's keep this money in our systems. Let's support each other.
Yeah. And in my younger days, I would have also team carried that guillotine with you. You know, caregiving for elders and parenting the long stretch smooths a lot of those combatant edges down into something that, in my perspective at least, is no less determined, but perhaps more thoughtful about what are the long range consequences of both total inaction, which to me, not voting is one of the forms of that, of refusing to participate at all. And I also have less patience with radicalism that might consider community expendable or collateral damage. And so if radicalism says that, well, some of us are going to be the collateral damage to achieve this absolutism that I want, this absolute goal that has no gray area, then I'm going to say, well, that's elders and children, and that's a lot of people who don't get to decide if they want to team carry that guillotine. Mm-hmm. So I don't, you know, I've participated in organizations and served on boards. And as I've gotten older, and I'm not saying I'm aged or elderly, I think Ahimsa and I might have to play a little pretend game of who has to go first at the feed. But I do have a tempered attitude now of, you know, falling on fewer swords. And what I do think about not voting, I think that for me, that's refusing to participate, and in a way, refusing to be realistic about the where and how and what we live in, and to refuse to participate at all removes your voice entirely from the process. And I
It
don't think
removes
it's
your
possible.
voice, but it does not remove the suffering you experience because of it.
Yeah, it doesn't. It just removes any opportunity you have to express an opinion about it. But I also don't think that voting is the total answer, which is why I think growing vegetables and cooking meals for people and those other things are slow growing seeds, but are actually really critical. You know, when I do get really upset, I think about my own tribal history, and I go, you know, I have family members buried at Wounded Knee, so I know what happens when people passively hope that the ghost dance is going to be the answer, that we will roll it back and everything will be the way we want, and it will not roll back. It just is never going to roll back. And so we are here and we are now, and we have to make some strategies that involve our reality and not just our absolute aspirations, but our reality, and while also holding those aspirations really dearly. But I think it's a slow game, but I think we've been playing a successful slow game for a long time. And I think we can continue. And I think actually the speed is picking up. It's wonderful and amazing. There are so many things that we talk about now that we could not put into words. When I was your age, Aubrey, it was not possible to put these things into words. And even they were the things like Rick Bartow says that you could just see, but you couldn't name. And they were just out of the corner of your eye. You knew they were there and you felt it was there and possible, but it just couldn't be brought to fruition. And those things are happening now. And so I vote, but I also cook, and I also, you know, care for people. And I think that, and I'll serve on boards and I'll march when I have to, but I've learned this weird skill as I got older, and it's discretion of my
Teach me.
that was not on my resume when I was younger. And not just discretion of being polite, but of like my energy and action. It's taken me a long time to figure out that not everybody deserves my rage. They just don't. That incandescent constant rage taps me in ways that then depletes me and gives me less to give to the people I want to give it to.
I mean, so something that's over here stewing for me. So discretion is also not on my resume. It's fine. I do love rage. She and I are best friends. But again, circling back to like this, about what is our realities. And so in the last presidential election, 77% of Native people voted. So that is a large chunk, number one. Now, also number two, we got to talk about voter suppression, which as an example, here we go from the Center for Public Integrity. Thank you, Twitter. Is that 27% of Native voters experienced barriers to voting in the last presidential election, and it's only increased since then. I mean, as an example, right now in South Dakota alone, 10% of Natives who represent the population, their vote is least likely to count because of these additional barriers and voter suppression techniques intentionally putting into place right now. And so, and like, how do we motivate people to get out there? So I am number one, not about these voting is sacred. I'm very much number one anti that. No, it's not. And I'm also, again, a firm believer, because it's true, that our communities have survived the worst, and they will survive the worst that's yet to come. We will, just because of our ancestral connections to like literally in our blood, because our gene, like we have altered gene expressions because of the resiliency of our ancestors. And that was proven, again, we already done been new, but that was proven like last year in this like wicked scientific study that was studying like the effects of cortisol and other stress hormones that manifest in the body under these like extreme conditions. Anyway, and so we carry all that on with us, and we experience that same level of intergenerational trauma in these sort of different ways. But along with that, I'm a firm believer we also got the intergenerational healing and resilience. And so no matter what happens, we will survive. But here's the thing though, is the process of surviving could be easier.
Thank you.
Could, definitely could. And voting, as much as I absolutely hate it, because this is a colonized, fascist, tyrannical state that is just all about imperialism, which is not up my alley. I do not subscribe. I still participate because of the fact that in Oklahoma, I could have more of a sway by energizing my community, because of the fact about policy. I mean, the fact that we look at little Miss ABC 123 Amy Whitewash colonizer lady who just be getting confirmed to the Supreme Court as she is a quote unquote originalist, that directly affects us. Because is she an originalist when it comes to white people in the Constitution? Yes. Or is she an originalist when it comes to the actual treaties, which predate the Constitution and are the highest law in the land, not the Constitution itself? Quote, the Constitution. We all know damn no, she ain't gonna do that. Anyway, and now we have to deal with her because of the results of the 2016 election. And we could potentially have to deal with so much worse because of the outcome of this election. And so something that I find to be really helpful within our community, and then I'd love to circle back to you, Audrey, for just like what you thought, is like education. How can we have these conversations with our elders, with our community members who have seen time and time again this country fail them, fail us, and can you continue to do so? How can we have these conversations in ways that are empowering, that also recognize and uplift, you know, the walking in two worlds, the we will survive no matter what, as well as presenting with the facts that we know at hand, and how, again, those policies directly affect us. I mean, we look here at COVID-19 as a wonderful example of this, wonderful in the worst ways, because policy directly affects how much Indian Health Services gets funded. And it is dramatic, it was underfunded by 52%.
And the racism in the data, that indigenous populations were being counted under other. The first peoples of this continent, of this country, of this landmass, other.
And it's not just, I mean, I believe Mexico 2 censuses ago removed the mestizo category.
Well, that's weird. I didn't stop existing.
So for them legally on their census, they are dramatically undercounting. And because of the cultural norms there, unless a person truly believes themselves to be 100% indigenous, they would always refer to themselves as mestizo, as a distinct culture. And so to give them no in between was creating perhaps as much as 40 to 50% of the population not having a category. And so dramatically underfunding programs. And so it's not, you know, the United States doesn't invent it. And there are other countries that we would assume would do better or maybe worse that are following suit, that take it for example. And so it becomes an international issue of how our indigenous people counted, provide a pathway here by an example of saying let's do it better. And maybe other places will not have to repeat ad nauseum our advocacy and our change. I think that would be, I get tired.
Right. And it's like, but who are the people who make those changes? Elected officials. Those are the
Exactly.
individuals who decide to take mestizo off the census. Like those are the individuals who put us in the other box. Those are the individuals who allowed, I don't remember how many white people to claim that they were of the Cherokee Nation, more so than there were of the Cherokee Nation. Those are the exact same people who are elected officials. And so
Exactly.
something as simple, well, it's not as simple because voter suppression and all things, but something, one singular act such as voting can have such a radical effect on every single thing that we do. And I find that like folks just don't know that. My grandparents didn't know that. My parents didn't know that. My partner, who is also Muskogee Creek, didn't know that. And he registered to vote for the first time in his adult life, and he's in his 30s, for this election because it was, again, purposefully the education that we receive is on purpose. And they on purpose do not tell us how connected all of these things are. Just like they on purpose do not teach our history, do not teach our ongoing genocide, do not teach about all these laws and policies. That's why we intentionally don't have media coverage and national coverage again for these epidemics that we face. That's why ain't nobody knew the United States sent body bags versus supplies for COVID-19 again earlier this year, just like they did with H1N1. People, like, it's all intentional, and this won't fix it all because, again, I don't believe in this country in the first place. But it all stems back to who are these elected officials? We can hold them accountable. I fucking hate Inhofe, but I'd be calling his ass constantly, telling him to get off it and do something. But he ain't. So vote for Amy. Please vote for Amy.
Amy.
But anyway, Amy. But yeah, I mean, but just having these conversations and really connecting the dots can really go such a long way within our communities.
Well, and something I think is really important is if we want different elected officials, then we have to put them there. And one of the things that was spoken about in that training that I had was, what does that look like? Because so many of us are not coming from this groomed intergenerational political families. Some of us are like, for the first people in our families going through college, and that matters. And so what they were saying is when we're coming from those kind of already disenfranchised positions, that it really is about the community has to support that. And that's not just we're voting for them. That is, maybe these people need us to pay their rent so that they can be this advocate for us in that political position. Maybe they need childcare so that they can focus on this campaign. They need money. They need money, and our communities have to raise that. And the other thing is, once we get someone of our own elected, that's not the end of the work. We still have to continue to support them. We can't now pretend like they're the colonizer because we put them in that position to serve us. And so we can't now ostracize them as if they're like an out-group member now. We have to continue to support them. And yes, part of that is accountability if they do go off being colonial, is to remind them who they are, to call them in. And I do strongly believe accountability is a form of love. I don't believe in cancel culture, really. I think that accountability, the way that I see it, calling people out, calling people in, I don't waste my time on things that I don't love. And it is a blessing for everybody on this planet that I was raised in a culture that loves everything.
Yeah, so over here, you feel, what are you thinking? Oh, I'm so sorry, Molly.
Oh, I was just going to say that one of my strategies as I've been thinking about moving forward is that while I still firmly believe and always will that art is a wonderful answer to many things, I've been thinking that personally, after the new year, I may be looking into running for some small and local offices, county election boards. I mean, the weird offices that we don't even think about that that make land policy and
in our own town, INCOG, in our own town, I went to some of their meetings.
And I was like, I don't know. I know.
Hey, Molly, I think the last little bit that cut off your audio, I think it caught in the middle of your sentence.
Okay. Just that that I think that that's where I could make a difference. If I have stability of my home and economics and some of those things, then maybe this is the point. And I did not have that in all of my previous life, that maybe this is the time to take that task on, as unsexy and, you know, unflattering as it may be, to, you know, look into being the under county commission, whatever the fuck those are. But that might be where, you know, real work can happen. And I'm also, my 20s were a smoking crater, so I can't run for anything above that. Good time.
So Aubrey, like this was sort of a bit of an engagement of a thread that you brought up. Would you want to like respond now that you've heard from like these other powerful sisters, or do you want to take the conversation in another direction, or do other people want to go in another direction? We could definitely stay on the election for a bit and talk about voter suppression, Native candidates. There's a variety of things that we could go from this place, but I want to first check in with you and see like what you're wanting to go with since you brought it up.
Send like the asata for everyone responding. It's really thoughtful, and like I have my little notebook out so I can think about this later too. So many things running around. Yeah, it isn't. I think going through the Creek election on the other side of it, it was really eye-opening and really like did kind of show me that what you guys are all saying, like this affects us every single day, especially on that kind of like smaller scale. And seeing and being able to ask the candidates and know them and go with my grandma to the debates and her saying, oh yeah, I know his mom, I know his aunt, I know we went to school together, or I went to school with him, or I did like this, that, and the other. And so I think for me, like thinking about all these things, of course, for me, that drew me into there. And it's interesting to think about it in terms of like the state. Like, I don't know these folks. Like, I don't know the majority. Like, I don't know these people personally. I don't know about their moms. I don't know about their grandma. Like, they're not going to tell me what tribal town they're from. Like, there isn't that connection there. And so, I think it's really interesting to think about. I engaged my best friend. He was not registered to vote. And so we had to have this kind of like that call-in conversation of, you know, this is a small scale. And then that's like, this is a small scale and this is what this can do here. Because of course it's the things of like, my vote doesn't count. I don't care, blah, 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 those kind of things. And I really appreciate the bringing up the voter suppression, because that is something that I think, I mean, that's been instilled in so many Native people. And like, why would they trust their oppressors? Like, that's just the form of suppression. Why would you trust that? And
or
thinking
why
about
get counted again? We've already been categorized.
Yeah, exactly. And like so many people this year just told me I'm not going to do the census. I'm not going to tell them these things. And it was just a really tough conversation.
Though.
Yeah, and it's a really tough conversation, I think, as also a young person trying to talk to my elders and like talk to them, and knowing that they've gone through, like they've heard before that they need to do the census and these different things, and really not trying to not. I think the discretion is something that I've also learned this year a lot. I've had to I've honestly distanced myself from some of my family, because I realize I want to be family with you for the rest of my life. And I don't want to end that connection in 2020. So I would rather us just not talk for a while, and then we'll reconvene when we see what happens, because I can't handle you right now. And taking that space. But then other family members who I have been talking to, it's interesting how like the feelings of anger or feelings of just like frustration and not being able to communicate that. I also think being a woman is a big part of that. And something that I, as the eldest granddaughter and eldest daughter, and my father's the youngest of four, has three older sisters, was raised by his mother, very strong women. My dad, like, I never really considered that, just because that's not how my household ran. It was very different. And I really only experienced those things when I was out at ceremonies and different things. But even then, I understood from one of my late aunts that that gender gap is that is also something of suppression. That is also something that was brought here. That wasn't something that we had naturally. And so once that was explained to me, and once that was explained to my dad, that was something that changed radically. And that's changed radically with my first cousins and how we really talk to each other and view each other. And yeah, I don't know exactly where I was going with that, but that's, I mean, it's just, all these things are just so interconnected, and it's a lot. Anyways, somebody can jump on.
Something I would also
say
oh,
that. Oh,
sorry.
I'll go real quick and I'll throw it back. Yeah. Something that I hear you like say through that I think we need to verbalize is that we can respectfully call in our elders, because you know, I'm just like waiting for like the native hot take version. I was like, oh my God. Anyway,
I'm just like sitting here like, our elders.
Right. Anyway, is that our elders are not exempt from colonization and from perpetuating ongoing acts of it. And again, I'm also very cognizant and very gentle and understanding that a lot of those choices were made because there weren't better ones. So again, I'm very like sensitive to that. I do not judge a single Native person who chose a route I may not have, or chose a route that may run in tandem with what the U.S. government tried to do. So full there. But we also have to be cognizant that some of these issues that we're currently dealing with are because we have elders who put those into place. We talk about anti-Blackness, especially within the 5 tribes in Oklahoma, but also just throughout the entire Native community. That was intentional and that was a choice. Talking like the like how women, how two-spirited folks, how queer folks have been treated is a choice. All of that are products of colonization and the choice to accept it. None of that is indigenous. None of that is traditional. Absolutely not. Anyways, whenever I just hear you say that, that just really what came up for me is that we can respectfully and with love, and within community and as relations, hold our elders accountable. But again, as we move forward, it's like, let's be real, y'all. What we have done, some of it hasn't worked. It has not worked. Time to change, and that's okay. And not violating any, terrible like cultural protocols. I'm pretty sure none of my ancestors are gonna beat my ass tonight. I'm pretty sure for saying that. But anyway, that's just what was coming up for me over here. Lydia.
Yeah, so what I was thinking too is just like another thing to keep in mind about voting is that voting doesn't just affect how our own communities will be treated. It also affects our relationship with the rest of the world. And something that concerns me as someone who is tied to the land here, who has family members who have been here pre-Cahokia, is that I love this land so deeply. And I have a sense that I will never be able to leave it because I love it so deeply. It matters so much to me. And I shudder to think at the kind of horrific foreign policy that can be put into place that jeopardizes this land. And I think that when we're thinking about our homelands and when we're thinking about our communities, we also need to be considering that our voting is voting for foreign relations, for interglobal relations, through relations with Indigenous persons all over the world. And that's important. Those are important relationships that do require a structure of government to happen. And we are moving at a faster pace than ever towards globalization. And it has been said that globalization will impact the most marginalized communities at exponential rates, which has already been happening. And so I think we just need to keep our communities in mind and then keep our communities in mind. Something unsettling I want to bring up is that the US has already made an agreement with a company to mine the moon when that technology becomes available. So, I mean, we really need to be thinking beyond our own communities to the things that we love and want to protect. I saw a quote today that said, Protect the things you love before they become a memory. And I think that's it. If we want these things to continue on, we have to really be considering all of the tools that we can use to protect them. And voting is one of them. It's not the solution, the solution, it's one.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that you brought up like globalization and like those two contexts, because I like to say capital I Indigenous for multiple reasons. For you all listening, if you didn't know, you capitalize the I in Indigenous, the
Thank
N in
you.
Native, and the B in Black, just in case you didn't know. But I say capital I Indigenous to talk about global Indigenous. Because of just how interconnected this is, and especially for how the United States has positioned itself, and again, a relatively short amount of time. Like, let me tell you, colonization is that bitch, and not for good reasons. Anyway, is that it truly does have a global impact. And again, I think about our environment and how 80% of the world's biodiversity is controlled by Native people, who are only 20% of the population of the planet. But also, of that 20% of Native people, 5% have control of their lands. So if you really think about it, 5% of the indigenous people around the world control 80% of that biodiversity. And so, right? Like,
yeah. And by the way, on the drawdown organization who is combating climate change, on their list of top 100 solutions towards climate change, Indigenous land ownership is on that. And that should be really, that means we're powerful. And when we're thinking about, protecting our communities and protecting our kin, are we not related to trees? Are we not related to rocks and animals?
Mm-hmm. And again, like finally on that, and then turn it back, is like looking at the West Coast right now, California, all the Pacific Northwest. These rapid wildfires that we have just seen year after year are the direct result of genocidal practices against the Native communities there. Because again, for thousands upon thousands of years, that land was stewarded, that land was cared for, and those type of wildfires did not exist. And so when we talk about climate change, that is inherently linked with tribal sovereignty. And again, when it comes to tribal sovereignty in this country, we need elected officials who will fight on our behalf and do what they're supposed to do. We need the right people on the court, as an example, who will interpret the treaties as they are supposed to be and as they still stand today. But I mean, that is a prime example. And it's the same thing whenever earlier this year in Australia had the same wildfire problem. It's because of the Aboriginal individuals being disenfranchised from their colonial government. And so, I mean, again, like there's so many solutions, so many things, but voting is one thing that we can do on Tuesday. Early voting ends in Oklahoma tomorrow, but you have until Tuesday, last possible moment. If you got mailed your ballot, please do not mail it. Go hand it, drop it off. If you cannot, reach out to someone who can.
Yes. If you have an absentee ballot in Oklahoma, you are still allowed to go vote in person. You just need to take that ballot with you. One thing I did want to say, though, in regards to like voting being a tool, is art's also a tool. And I say that, bringing it back to the wildfires in California, is one of the things that made that transition out of doing prescribed burnings that the indigenous people were doing over there into, this kind of genocidal treatment of the land. That was in part because of the Hudson River School, which is an art movement. And what they were doing is they were, the bucolic nature, the untouched, pristine nature, that was all part of a narrative, right? That was all part of that doctrine of discovery narrative, that westward expansion narrative, that manifest destiny narrative. If it was untapped land, if it was pristine, then obviously it wasn't being used correctly. And so art plays a big role in changing the social ideas about what is correct or what is not correct. And artists played a big role in that, in making the public think that we shouldn't burn the forest.
I was just going to ask you if you meant art as like a little t or a big T tool. And and so I think we can agree Hudson River painting is a big capital T tool.
That's like
Um,
propaganda.
It is propaganda. It was propaganda, and it was very successful propaganda. It was one of many tools at a time, including, you know, yeah, writing and many other tools. And it was all predicated on creating a system where people could do those. I'm really fond of an analogy that people do really complicated algebra equations in their head to decide if actions are correct or not. So if you've been taught that X equals this, and you get confronted with information that that's not true, then you will probably instead decide that that new information is not true because you already were taught that X equals this. And so if you're taught that the native people don't intervene with their landscape, that they're passive and ignorant and barely getting by, then you can't possibly believe that they interacted with the landscape with an enormous amount of impact in terms of forestry and food and sheer numbers of population, and so all of these things have the part of this algebra equation in people's head that if these people are passive and uneducated and illiterate and not interacting, if they're another animal in the forest, which again we don't believe is true, that they're inanimate or passive, but if that's your belief, then everything flows like dominoes out from that. And I think it's very evident that because you can go to individuals now and you can say, just watching social media in my home state of Montana about the gray wolves being taken off the endangered species list, and seeing how many people have really intense opinions who don't own sheep. And so I don't know why they have intense opinions about wolves. They've never seen one. They've never interacted with one. They have no reason to care. And even if they did own sheep, they'd be killed by feral dogs. So, but they already have the algebra equation in their head about this equals this and this equals this. And it rolls out, and you couldn't even talk to them about the Hudson River School. They don't know why or where they got this information, but it is deeply entrenched and deeply embedded and rolls out in ways that are bizarre and unpredictable. And I think it's really telling that our communities, to one degree or another, to very small to very large degree, have been doing the work of unpicking out that embroidery, of detangling those lines, and to figure out, well, here's this symbol in this algebra equation. I want to follow it back to the source. I want to find out why we started believing that was so.
Colonization.
Well, but so which parts are ours and which parts are theirs, and where did they get wrapped up around each other, and how? And I really feel like it's like untangling a giant bag of yarn someone gave you that's all messed up, and you need to find out which of these things are true, and let's take that thread all the way back. Why did we start believing that's true? Because there are times where Native people believe stuff about themselves that's very, the sourcing is very suspect, and it is very difficult for Native people to find out that something they believe about themselves is not true. And it is, I think, doubly entrenched for the greater Anglo world to find out that something they believe about themselves or their actions is not true. And I think that's actually been this dialogue we've been suffering under this year, is yelling at the screen and going, how can you not be open to the idea that thing that you believed, that tiny thread that went all the way back, is not true? You don't know where it is. You don't know where it came from. You can't name it, but you are holding on with a death grip. And I feel like our communities have been doing the work of untangling and figuring it out and finding better sources. And so to see a whole community refuse to engage is disconcerting, and has been a psychic burden this year.
Psychic burden, yes.
Yeah. That was a lot. Sorry. When you're isolated all the time and you get an audience, you're just like, ugh.
When we see each other in Molly's studio, because our studios are next door to each other, it's just, we are so hungry to talk and connect. And that's why I think dialogues like these are really important. Like each of you I know in different contexts, and some I see very regularly, weekly, physically, like Molly, because we're right down the hall from each other in the studio. some I talk to on a pretty regular basis, like Lydia, Aubrey I speak to, and then in terms of Tara, she's someone I adore, and we're increasingly spending more time together and talking about future ways that we can engage. And I think that's one of the things I most miss, not, and I want to maybe throw this up to you as something, is not, and it's on multiple levels in terms of the intersecting crises right now: political, electoral, environmental, intensification of violence and oppression and targeting of our communities, pandemic is, and I just want to, I don't know, maybe throw it out there if you're interested. And I've also mentioned to the panels both prior to tonight and via like private chat in Zoom, that if you want to take the conversation in a different direction, this is your dialogue. So wherever you want to go with it. But one of the things I would maybe be interested in hearing y'all talk about is, so I'll just share briefly, like, I have been pulling lately this past week 18 to 20-hour days and at least 2 nearly all-nighters just to get so much done. And my life has been like that for months. And part of the reason is I just feel so much is at stake on so many levels. And coming from a very multi-generationally mixed race family, and in addition to my mix up to this generation, our family keeps on mixing. So when I'm thinking about I'm a grand uncle. So when I'm thinking about my grandnieces and nephews, you know, they are as equally Black as they are Asian, as they are Native, as they are Latinx, as they are Arab, as they are white, because that is how mixed my grandnieces and nephews are. You know, we're multi-generational families, been mixing in the East Coast and the Pacific for centuries. So when I'm thinking about, you know, the realities of my communities and why I care so deeply, and that's just on a racial, ethnic, ancestral level. Also being queer and trans, like being a survivor, coming from a poor working class reality and a mixed class, very alternating up and down between below or slightly above poverty line, then slightly maybe working class, then back down, and just really for most of my adult life, like when I think about, and I'm not going to say which family member, that we have some family members that are similar in terms of situations, identities, struggles, commitments, and stuff like that. And there are other family members that are much more privileged on a variety of different levels. And they may not care about the election in the same kind of way because they're not targeted in the same way. But for me, I can't not think this could mean the world's catching on fire. You know, not only because I'm not in denial, as we were talking about before, but also I'm very clear that my multiple communities and the peoples I hold dear and our territories and this planet are under attack. And so within that, the larger question that I'm building towards is, which might sound weird to bring around this way, is as someone who has been like burning, as my mama used to say, like, may she rest in peace, burning the candle at both ends and in the middle, like that, I've just been like, you know, just giving until I have nothing left to give, and then still giving, and then still working. And then I've been talking a lot, particularly with other loved ones who are also like Native women and Two-Spirit queer trans Native folk and women of color and queer trans people of color, about this continual laboring, this continual giving, this continual mentoring, the emotional laboring, communal laboring, caretaking. Like, what does it mean when we're constantly taking care of others and sometimes working ourselves to death? And I'm thinking about that in a lot of ways. And I guess my thing is, in terms of all these intersecting crises and the challenges of this year, what are your thoughts on this larger topic, just in general? Like, and does it resonate in particular ways? And what can we do? Because there is so much at stake, but we don't need additional martyrs. We need additional people to be here long-term for these long-term multi-generational struggles, and to remain activated, to remain caring, to remain healthy. Or I'm a much fluffier biscuit than I was many months ago, and I was already a very healthy biscuit a few months ago because I'm just simply not getting as much exercise. Molly and I used to be gym partners in addition to art partners, and we'd work out a few times a week at the gym, and I would go outdoors every day, when some days I just worked to save the country from in my little cave of an apartment and don't even go outside and see the sun because I'm trying to mobilize work here in Oklahoma, work back home in New York, nationally, internationally, because I feel not just with the election, but with all the struggles, so much has been at stake that I couldn't do anything else. So I guess my question is like, does any of that resonate with y'all or other people you know or communities are a part of? And how do we take care of ourselves? And how do we, not just in general, but also in terms of the coming next week, both prior to the election and the election day and post? And yeah, any way that you might want to engage that, I would love to hear from y'all. So thank you for letting me share that.
So
I'm
I've
in
got
your same boat. Yeah, yeah. Yep, I'm right there. So folks who know me personally are like, what is Tara doing telling people about self-care advice? Because what the fuck she know? She don't do nothing. Yeah, true. But something I have been exploring in regards to like a recent project I'm developing is like around intergenerational trauma, but also like what I've been doing throughout 2020 is really identifying like why like I'm experiencing the things that I'm experiencing that I've also heard a lot of Native people experience. Because I think back to like March 11th, so clear in my brain. March 11th, whenever pandemic went down here, at least from my perspective, and it's my body reacted in a way that I could not recognize, didn't have words to, but now do. Is that like being very, very aware in knowing like without a fact like for a fact what's to come, and then actually identifying that that is coming from intergenerational trauma that my folks have experienced predating the Spanish flu, just all the way back to like brought diseases as biological warfare. And like what my people did, we hid in the fucking Everglades. Dead to everyone, we don't exist. Anyway, because I found myself very recently being like, wow, I have literally not left the confines of my apartment and I cannot tell you how long. Like I don't even check the mail. My partner checks the mail. Like I don't even go outside. Anyway, and that is just coming from that very deep ancestral place again, because them genes be fired up and be knowing like this is what we gotta do. Anyway, but all that being said, I'm also a firm believer that we don't just inherit this intergenerational trauma, but we also inherit intergenerational healing. And looking back at just my own family and ancestry, how did they get through that? They got through that by being in relationship with one another, by being in community with one another. I mean, Hemza, like you and Molly just shared it earlier about like sharing meals with one another as you can. So what has helped me now recently, because I put all the dots together, won't say when, but I did, is finding those moments where I can connect culturally in communityly anyway, relationally in those sort of ways. I mean, and that goes back to I realized I haven't burned medicine in months. Didn't realize it's been that long. I haven't beat it in months. Didn't realize it's been that long. Because getting back to what Molly you were saying at the beginning, like being in a good place to be able to like like put in that good medicine into what you're creating. I haven't like been able to do that. Like I am a at-risk person, and so I can't go outside anyway. But also realizing like I haven't talked on the phone to my grandmother in months, and she and I would just chit chat all the fucking time, just about whatever. And so just finding those little ways to connect, and stay true to like what got our ancestors through this. So that's what's really been helping me is thinking about how did my ancestors, how did my living family members survive all of these things. Like my mother barely survived the Indian Child Welfare Act. My father barely survived boarding schools. Keep on going, right? But they did. And how did they do it? They did it within community by sticking true, even though they knew that them sheriffs would be driving down those little back roads trying to find our grounds. And so they planted trees so they couldn't be seen, moved 1.5 miles more back into the wilderness so they could have a place to be. And so it's what can we do now that is, again, very reminiscent of how our ancestors overcame and their resilience. because we also carry that genetically and within our literal blood, as science has proven, you know, not just the trauma aspects of it, sort of what I offer.
Yeah, Native joy is resilience, is resistance.
We're fighting people.
Yeah. A couple of things I do want to say too is to point back at the Indian Child Welfare Act. How do you think we got that? Voting, policy, litigation. That is being attacked right now. And if we want to keep our babies in our culture, we have to vote. We have to be clued into the political systems that want to take our children from us and basically, you know, do boarding schools again. Something really upsetting to me that I recently kind of became aware of, and I think, you know, there's a Paris Hilton documentary out right now, is the fact that these boarding schools aren't just happening to our children, they are doing this to their own children. So let's just be very real that this is not something that's going to quit. So we have to protect our children. But to go back to the rest and or how we're coping or what we're doing or whether we're resting or not resting, is something I had heard, and I think it's going around on the internet, is that parable of choir. So in a chorus, people are sustaining a note, but there's so many sustaining that note that people are able to drop out and take a breath when they need to, and then join back in without it sounding like the note's been broken at all. And that activism should be that way. So I think that we should be very aware that we are allowed to rest. We are allowed to rest, and we're encouraged to rest because this work doesn't end. That's something I've become really aware of is, you know, I've been crying to a lot of my elders this year, like, why? And they're like, oh, buckle up because I'm still doing this work at 70. And I'm like, no. And they're like, yes. And I'm like, okay. So I'm very into the NAP bishop, Tricia Hersey, who speaks to rest as resistance. She is a Black woman, and she really speaks to, when I rest and remove myself from grind culture, I am healing my ancestors from the labor that was placed upon their bodies by capitalism, by colonialism. And I think that that's really powerful. So I 100%, I subscribe to resting as a resistance. I love that. The third thing I'll say is a good tool of resistance: babies, little fluffy, cute babies. They need homes. We need love. This is a good tool. This is good medicine right here.
Fluffy boys. What did I do? Well, you know, because 2020 hit at my coming out year, and all of my my give a shit was already busted pretty hard. So I just sort of when I felt that this wave of pandemic was coming, I kind of retreated into my survival skills. And I grew up in pretty deep poverty in a place that I would call not that distance from frontier. So I grew up with wood cook ranges and wood stoves. And even though I live in suburbia and everything is safe, I still I don't believe it. And so I still have water and seeds and food and flour, and because I've been expecting a pandemic for a long time, many liters of isopropyl alcohol and nitrile gloves and everything. If your neighborhood gets Ebola, I can help you out. I'm there. I've got the trash bags, the rubber gloves, the works. So a therapist once told me that it's not paranoia if it actually happens, then it's just preparation. So I dug into that, and then I also had to double down on the momming, as I had a very frightened 18-year-old fleeing back from a freshman year of college, and having to go, okay, so I'm not done with this chapter. And in fact, now I've got a very scared, anxious 18-year-old, and everything that I had told her to expect of adulthood was now upside down. And I was going to have to, sort of parent through that anxiety and those expectations of, here's all the things we told you you got to do as an adult. And sorry, I forgot to tell you that this was all contingent. And in fact, I forgot to kind of tell you that everything's contingent all the time. I thought you would get it like a few more years for that to sink in. But to have to say college is canceled was weird. And not because of anything you did. Like, that was the only contingency we hadn't planned on, was that, like, sure, you could screw it up, but I didn't think the world would screw it up. So instead of looking outward, I really had to kind of auger in at home and focus on individuals day to day. How are we doing? How are we getting through? Food and yeah, like giving masks to Aubrey, I made and I'm making masks and still doing it, because I felt like one of the most active things I could do was slap a little protection on people's faces and hope that there were more of them at the end of this because of some small action. And then I started giving away beadwork once a week and just giving stuff away, and thought that's about the capacity I have. And so now that, now that we're in this for the long haul, and we know it now, we're not all looking for the next 2 months is going to be the answer. I think we all know that. I'm starting to try to imagine, what is the next year of life going to be in this space? And that's a bizarre place to be planning for. What is the next year in this world and in this dynamic? And to stop making 2-month plans. Not that 2-month plans are bad, but that's what we were doing. And to start to think, well, we might be easing out of this for the next 1 to 2 years, slowly, incrementally, bit by bit. And so it's time to sort of take those temporary crisis goggles off and to do some longer range planning for me, for my immediate family, for my quarantine family, for my community, and to start to see that how that radiates out, and to see how far away I can get from my center of me. How far do I get out of that circle? How many layers out do I get before my resources run out? My mental, personal resources. At what point do they just peter out? So, because when I went into survival mode, I went into like 3 layers. It was like me, kids, spouse, house, elderly parents, and like it stopped like there. Like that was it. And now I feel like, okay, if I can think long-term and get into a place of real acceptance, then I can maybe reallocate some resources and reach out past those inner cores for a little bit farther. And I made way too much corn relish.
Blasphemy. The relishing of the corn is my favorite time of year. So in addition to all the other times of the year when you're making things are seasonal.
I doubled it. I went big. I think it was 56 pints.
Yeah.
Lord, that's double what you usually do.
That is double. That is double what I usually do.
I can't wait to have a green space, I guess that's another thing too, is like, yeah, this pandemic's not going away. Even if the folks win who we need and want to win on Tuesday or whenever, it's not going anywhere. Like, and I've been telling, in the theater, it's a very interesting place, because like our entire field has shut down. And folks who've invested hundreds and thousands of dollars and hundreds and thousands of hours into this profession, and training and this, that, and the other, the theater is not going to come back for a long time. And so something I've been telling my fellow theater folks is that, like, yeah, like mourn that, absolutely. But now's the time to think creatively.
Thank you.
Like, we can't just sit and mourn all day long. And again, like, I do love some mourning. It's needed. We have to do that. do what you need to do, but making the choice to stay there past when you've done what you needed to do doesn't help. You stay in that, sink or swim survival mode, and that amount of cortisol is not good for you. I know firsthand that was not good for you. Anyway, and so it's what time to think creatively, and I find that to be a very exciting time. And I think like it can be an exciting time. And so that's something that I've been trying to encourage like my colleagues is like, yes, absolutely mourn the hopefully temporary loss of our medium. Absolutely. Now, once that's done, and once we've done that, how can we move forward respectively where we feel empowered? I mean, because just like our bodies are not meant to have so much cortisol and stress for so long, our bodies are also not meant, our spirits definitely are not meant to be in a period of mourning long term. Like, absolutely not.
I think it's important in these times to remember our ceremonies, because in the Osage way, we mourn for 4 days. And that is a good amount of time to kind of feel the fullness of all of the emotions that come with grief, and then to set it aside and to return to joy and to look at, what we have. I think that's really important. Also, something I'll say is, this is an exciting time. You're absolutely right. And as creative people and as Indigenous people who have always been creative people, to consider that right now we're in this space between stories, and we really do get to decide what we want our future to look like. And something I kind of thought of the other day or last night, today, whatever time is, a construct and not linear, is that it's kind of funny to me. We've spent all of this time, building these dystopian writings, right, of this horrible future. And guess what? We made it come true. And I think that we have to be really careful about what kind of things we're creating. And I just question, if we weren't writing dystopian novels, and I don't mean we as an Indigenous folks writing these dystopian novels, I'm just saying if the greater populace was, instead of being so negatively focused on the way the world ends, if we were focused on the beautiful future where biodiversity is thriving, maybe we would be leading ourselves to those futures. I'm just saying we write our future. We create our futures off of what we envision and give our energy to. And if we aren't being creative about what that looks like, then we're just kind of at the whim of whoever has a horrible idea.
Yeah, what we focus on grows. And I thought of that years ago. I was like, if you're always focused on the oppressor or the colonizer, continually and resisting all the time, which is important, resistance is important. But if they're always at the center of your consciousness, you're being colonized through that continual focus, through your rage and anger or sadness or whatever it is on them. And you need to decolonize and center on your own peoples and to think about affirmational work in addition to resistance work.
Manifesting works, y'all. Ooh, it worked. I manifested a lot of good things to myself recently. It works.
Can I share something that's happening off camera with you all real quick? Yes. The cat, so there's a big giant drum. I don't know what it's called, but it's about this big around and it's tall. And the cat is currently playing on it and drumming for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Aubrey, would you like to sort of share your thoughts on this larger theme of, maybe self-care or communal care, or, working ourselves so much in terms of these things, and how do we take care of ourselves at this very challenging time?
So just coming out of my undergrad, I don't know how I'm going to phrase it. I went to a private liberal arts college in Colorado Springs, and it was my first time ever, living away from home. I never really stayed. The only camps I stayed at was like the Muskogee language summer camp. And then I went to College Horizons. That was my extent of being away from home, really, or being at, the ceremony at the beginning of the summer where I'm gone for a week, or, things like that. But never had been in that kind of space. And I went from high school organizing and doing all of these things, being a academically high achieving student, also, and this is a trigger warning, experiencing assault, and, going through that and having to go through that, and then experiencing assault again and again and again, and not really understanding what was going on and continuing to push myself, and then experiencing the loss of my aunt and experiencing the loss of my great aunt the next year. I was, by the time I graduated in 2019, I'm still not very old. I felt so done, and I didn't have any plans. And I was a first gen student going into school and was very confused and didn't really understand how grad school worked or all these different things. And I had hopes of coming home and having good relations with different organizations that I've been tied with my whole life in the community. And those ended up, it ended up kind of, the year just kind of, it wasn't my year. I graduated and that was great. And then it just kind of felt like things weren't going super well. So at the start of this pandemic, also dealing, another trigger warning, with some domestic violence, it was really challenging. And I really have gone into myself. And I think that now, kind of like Molly was saying, I'm kind of at a point where I'm safe again. I'm dealing with a lot of things, and I have, thankfully, my parents and my younger sister are some of my best friends. And I'm very thankful to live with them right now. And my dog, of course, he's an angel. And so all the work I do, I try my best. And I really think that for me, my best right now is not who I thought I was going to be right now. And I think that for me, I've had to really understand that that's okay, because there's nothing else I can only give so much right now. And I've really kind of understood, and this was something that happened the other day, but I was at the grocery store, and I was at a Target, a little bit more bougie than my typical Walmart run. And I was in my Target trying to get some moisturizer, and these two women come by not wearing a mask. There's another woman standing there, like, trying to, why aren't you wearing your mask? You have it in your hand. They handed it to you at the door, getting really loud. Walked past me. I got caught up in the commotion, and just like, because of course that's where my mind takes me. It's as like, I'm an able-bodied individual who's white passing, and there's all these people around me, and I'm angry, and I went into that without really thinking, and then was met with, and this is really horrific, I'm gonna grab you by the P asterisk asterisk at like. And then they told me I was a Biden loving bitch and just all these different things. And I had to, in my moment, I don't know what, some ancestor grabbed me back and said, your Indigenous body does not need to do this right now. You need to grab that moisturizer. You need to check out and go to your car and take a breath. Cause that was too much for me. I had to turn away, and I said, I'm going to go to jail if I interact with this woman. Like, I felt like so angry. So this year has been wild. And I think that moment for me, this was just like a week or two ago, really made me understand that it kind of connected a lot of dots for me, in that I am, as multiracial as I am, I also have succumbed, not on purpose, of course, to different statistics of Native women being assaulted at a higher rate, of domestic violence, of this. And so I have to give myself that space to heal. And it's not as what, like, the grind culture and the productivity. And it's not that right now. Right now, that's me being here and becoming the best baker I can possibly be. Catch me on a Great British Baking Show, like, as soon as possible. But that's all I can do. And I really appreciate hearing from you guys, like, what you guys have been going through. And especially Molly, you saying, like, I can only handle this much, and I really can only handle this much. There was a point when I felt like I couldn't see my grandma because I felt like I didn't want to put all of the things I was feeling. I couldn't expose that in that way at that moment. That just it didn't feel safe for me at that time. And, we're getting 9 months into this. And I think that like, at this point, the seed has started, like, of course it's growth, like it's there, it's blooming. We're going to be in this. And also, unfortunately, really getting kind of hit with that realization of, there's a lot of colonial things that have been happening, and the only things you can trust are the things that you're doing and the things that like feel good for you at that moment. And unfortunately, because of colonization, other people have adverse thoughts to that, and like really trying to be gracious with that. And those are the only places that I've really been able to go. And with my family who have different opinions than me, I just watch them and I think colonization has really done a lot to us. It's really done a lot in a lot of different ways, and it continuously hurts us. And maybe at another point in your life, we'll be able to have this conversation, and it can be open, and we can try to heal together. But right now, it's difficult to heal while you're still inside of, like, while you're still getting harmed. Like,
Yeah.
just like it's kind of like the thing of like, I'll give you a reason to cry, but like kind of that sort of, that's what it kind of feels like a lot of the time, is like you want to like, oh, your arm's hurting, do you want me to kick your leg? And then that you'll be distracted from that. And so healing with that, and that is so hard. And I think, and I've had to express to Ahimsa sometimes, I can't function right now. Unfortunately, right now I need to be at home, and right now I need to be in my little space. I need to meditate. I need to breathe. I need to move my body. And that's really, I think, also where I found a lot of peace this year, has been trying my best to reconnect my body and feel more confident in my strength, knowing that being a younger person, there is inevitably going to be another point where I'm going to need to put my body on the line because of marches, because or whatever's going to happen, because no matter who we elect, it's not going to solve all of our problems. And we've already seen what can happen. And there's riots and protests going on right now in other parts of the country. And just, realistic healing is hard, but I appreciate everybody is like talking about this. And yeah.
I'm glad you're so gentle with yourself and really talked about that. Yeah, I just really appreciate that. So I just wanted to vocalize that.
Oh, thank you.
You can't heal from a wound that's still open. If it's still bleeding, you can't put a Band-Aid on it. If you need stitches, Band-Aid ain't gonna fix it.
And you can still open it back up. Unfortunately, you can open it right back up. I didn't think that the pandemic was going to spark so many anxieties that I felt like I had dealt with, and it did. And it is something that, is a daily, I'm right now, I'm holding my little grounding rock, because I just want to make sure that like I stay in the conversation, and I want to make sure that like I'm aware and I feel okay. Like, so it's just small things. I think that this year has really shown me like, I have to be gentle with myself, and I have to be as gentle as possible with the people I love, because I know that right now it's so high stress. And I think also being gentle with ourselves is not immediately, I think a lot of people want to go into that revolutionary state. And like we were saying earlier, the people I know and myself, I don't want that. I don't want to have to sacrifice my loved ones, and loved ones I don't even know yet. When we could try this when we haven't already. So please, everyone, vote. Please, if you can.
Yeah. And I just want to thank you for sharing on so many levels. And one of the things from tonight is how much more profoundly I love y'all, the deeper I get to know you, and your geniuses in multiple ways, your bravery in multiple ways, your creativity, your kindness. And so for me, like as a survivor, as both a child and an adult of multiple forms of violence, including twice being a rape survivor. I just want to honor, to speak from my place in terms of how your sharing impacted me tonight. And I think when we share our stories and when we share about that, it creates space for other survivors, just like whenever we share about our identities, it creates space for people who share those identities or experiences. Is, for me, one of the things I've often wondered, because I've survived, you know, both abusive situations as a child, domestic violence situations. I've had my life physically threatened through hate crimes. I'm twice a rape survivor. And I've also survived really violent, harassing, stalking work situations and a variety of other things, and a violent housing situation. That's why I'm not on social media. I left an abusive housing context that, and the person there stalked me and threatened me and another loved one that day. And we all have complex feelings vis-a-vis the police industrial complex. And I also affirm the right of whatever survivor to do what they need to take care of themselves, so that even if we believe in restorative justice, if you need to pursue a restraining order, that's within your right and no one should critique that. So my final night in New York, as I was leaving that abusive, toxic, threatening situation, I filed a police report for the first time in my life. And one of my dearest friends spent 3 hours with me from 11 p.m. until 2 a.m., you know? And it wasn't actually until I came back to the place where I was staying in temporary housing because of that actually there was the email there waiting for me from the Tulsa Artist Fellowship, letting me know I've been accepted for 2 years of funding and I'd have stable housing. And I just started crying. Like, here I'm like in a hotel because I can't stay in the place where I was paying rent because someone has literally had a knife to my back and stalked me and threatened my friends and loved ones and done all these, body checked me and done all these crazy things. And here I felt like I was being affirmed by spirit that I was choosing myself and my safety and my future and well-being and taking a tremendous leap of faith when I didn't know where I was going to live, but I had to be outside of that context. I had to get out. And even the leaving was very strategic in the middle of the night, packing up things so the person wouldn't know I was leaving. And they didn't even know I was packing and leaving until the actual morning that I took out the last little things, you know? And so within that, just feeling like one of the things that when you were sharing is if we've survived violence and harassment or oppression multiple times, we sometimes, speaking for myself, feel like, what am I doing that's making me a target? Why are these predators, these perpetrators always finding me? And why? And it's not that, but that's where your mind goes, you know, where you're like, why? Like, what is this big war, you know? And I think we can look at dynamics and we can think about how to see patterns and traits and learn that. And we're definitely not responsible for our violence that we've experienced, others perpetrating against us. But I just wanted to say, when you were sharing about that, that's where my mind went about how we sometimes have to work through that and find these safe, loving spaces. And I truly believe that theory, thank God for this bridge called My Back and radical women of color and queer trans folk of color, that let me know from a very young age, relatively as a teenager, that theory wasn't this elite thing. Theory was groups of oppressed people coming together, talking story, and realizing we had shared experiences and that we could analyze that oppression together, and then we could analyze how to resist it and dismantle it. And that's for me what theory is. And so I just want to say, when we as survivors, when we as Native peoples, as women, as queer trans folk, as whoever's experienced oppression, when we come together and share our stories and pierce that isolation that oppression wants to isolate us further, like a power and control wheel, you know, like of isolation, like we help each other heal. So I want to thank you for sharing what you shared tonight, because it helps me reflect on my own healing and to think about, yeah, if these assaults of oppression and harassment and violence are ongoing in our society, how do we take care of ourselves and each other long term? So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. Send the cross.
This has been really powerful tonight, and I don't want to have the last word, and that was very long. So I just want to, as we wrap up for tonight, and we didn't take questions from the audience because originally this was going to be on Facebook Live where people would be much easier to give questions. So I want to be really clear. If you had questions and tried to get them to us, we checked in with AICH staff and we weren't seeing any via the different interfaces because YouTube doesn't really have that in the same kind of way. So within that, you know, as this is a recording later, this will be recorded later and placed on YouTube and Facebook. Hopefully this will continue further dialogues. But I want to just sort of close out with y'all and be like, is there anything you wanted to share as final thoughts or words or things you want to do to thank the other sisters that we've been with tonight, or just anything? I want to not be the last person who speaks tonight because I just adore you and I'm honored to be in your presence.
I'm going to hug all y'all. That's what I'm going to do. Lovely to see everybody. Really, really lovely.
Yeah, thank you all for this conversation. I just feel so blessed to know each of you and to have these opportunities to meet and to speak. Yeah, from the heart and openly and in the ways that we do. Go vote.
Alec Adida, like I appreciate all of you, Senlek Asata, Ahimsa, and the other organizing groups for getting this together, and the other panelists for being so gracious and being so willing to share. It's been really interesting. I have a lot of things to continue to think about, and I think that yeah, talking a story like this, especially with like other powerful people, it's really great. And like it really, I think during this time, especially before all these other things are about to continue to roll, it's really nice to know that like we can still have community, we can still do these things, and it's the world isn't hopefully gonna get on fire, but we need to vote to help make sure that that isn't happening.
Just Mado, everyone. Thank you. Thank you also so much for like the reminder about being gentle with oneself and the reminder of self-care and the reminder to take care of ourselves and our communities. Yeah, and then just also the reminder that Miss Rona will not keep us apart. She will not. And yes, and again, one final thing, do not forget early voting is tomorrow in Oklahoma. If you're absentee ballot, just find the king. Please don't mail it. Take it with you to your voting station on Tuesday or drop it off at the county board. If you cannot physically drop it off, reach out to folks. If you're in the Tulsa area, even though I'm immunocompromised, I can bully my partner into doing it for us. So we will take it for you. Anyway, but reach out to folks. Our communities are so much stronger than we are led to believe, or that the government wants us to believe, or what other people to believe. So do reach out, do it.
Mm-hmm. And take care of yourselves, because we won't know the election results. They're saying we won't know them in the time frame we normally do. So this will be a month-long process, and we might not know who has taken over leadership until basically December. So just let's all be very gentle with ourselves. Let's all remember that we are in a marathon and not a sprint, as Molly said in the chat.
Yes. Also, Native American Heritage Month starting on Monday.
So, and keep your eyes peeled when you're doing your Google searches next month, because there may or may not be some Indigenous art popping up.
Yes. Yeah. So I hope you'll also take the time to celebrate. There's all kinds of cool stuff. You want to come see a healing play? Tulsa got one Sunday and Monday. Monday, come to the other talk. Don't worry, you can access the link until past midnight, so you can go to both. All kinds of cool things happening.
Beautiful. Thank you both so much. I want to invite Tanis and Ty to come on from the American Community House if they want to just maybe say a few things about the Community House and some additional programming that's coming up, and some of the work that we do in general, maybe. And then I'll close out by just mentioning the next two dialogues and then say a few final quick words. So thank you so much.
Yeah. On that note that Tara just mentioned about plays, we have some upcoming youth programming that is happening starting on Sunday that we're super excited about. We have a series, an acting drama series for Native youth that is still open to register and apply for. We still have some spaces left. It's Zoom, so we got a lot of room. So it is open for ages between the ages of 8 and 20. We're basically giving you information about a little bit about the business of acting, and of course, giving you some acting work to work on, a little bit of writing, a little bit of everything when it comes to the drama world. And we're doing it every Sunday from 3 to 5 p.m. EST. Myself, Ty Defoe, who is on here with us, and Ryan Opalani, Tet Pierce are facilitating. And it will culminate with all the young actors being cast in short plays and being directed by professional directors, one of which is our Tara, who is on our call right now. Plays that are being commissioned specifically for this by professional Native playwrights as well. All Native, everything. We got a Native stage manager. It's amazing. We're so excited for this. So please, if you have any youth who are interested in this, shoot them our way, send us a DM or email tanis@aich.org. You can find us. We'll get your messages, message us one way or the other. Other
And
than
that's
that,
again for people anywhere in
yeah,
Turtle Island, right? They don't have to be in New York City because it's virtual. Yeah.
Yeah, good. It's virtual, it's online, so you can be anywhere all over Turtle Island. And then Tuesday and Thursday next week, we have our Fit Native program, which is a live workout class that I lead, usually at noon on via Zoom and Facebook Live as well. And we also have, so we had a series this summer called Native Theater Thursdays, which was a live play reading, usually full length. Sometimes it was some shorts together. And we're doing another one next Thursday. We are doing Bingo Hall by Dylan Cheeto. Yeah, Tara, we want you to direct. Say yes. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll be choosing another one. So that's all upcoming. Yeah, very exciting. I don't think I missed anything. So
beautiful.
I'll send it back to you, Himsa.
Yeah. And AICH has a wide range of programming from environmental and land and water-based things in terms of we've been on Governor's Island in New York City doing various things there, programming there, things tied to multiple forms of art, such as the performing arts, multiple things tied to women and Native women and Native Two-Spirit and queer trans folk, indigenous folk, tied to children and youth and families, tied to elders, tied to social justice. We've been around for over 50 years, since 1969, the year of Alcatraz and Stonewall and founding ethnic studies. So still going strong and doing a lot. So check out American Indian Community House, and you can Google us, and we're in New York City. And especially in this time of COVID, doing a lot of things very pan-Northeast and pan-Turtle Island. So we welcome you, all of you. And then I'll mention just the next two dialogues when they're occurring. So the next one is going to be this coming Monday, and that's going to be Monday, November 2nd from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 to 8 p.m. Central. And then the last one is going to be after the election on Saturday, November 7th from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 to 3 p.m. Central. And we've got a great lineup of folk. The second dialogue, we're going to be having Ozawa Benishi Albert, Shawi Olale Glenda S. Dillingham, Jenny Keller, and Jasa Lyons Echohawk. And then on the third dialogue, we're going to have Vince Cristosimo, Kristen Gentry, Alison Herrera, Beverly Little Thunder, D. Kaali'i McKenzie, and Joseph M. Pierce. And so if you want to be on some other dialogues, engage in this historical moment, pre and post-election, mobilizing folk, please tune into those other things. There'll be additional information on the AICH website, our social media, such as Facebook and Instagram. And depending on how the tech works, know that you can check out either our YouTube page, where it might be streaming, or Facebook, depending on the powers that be in that moment. So check both on that night just to be safe. And yeah, and please, these videos are being recorded, so please share them. Hopefully they encourage other people to not feel so isolated, to feel loved, supported, and energized during this historical time, and get out that vote. Early voting is happening in a lot of places prior to Tuesday. And then for different time zones, different time periods on Tuesday itself. And even some places, some states even allow you to still register up on election day. So look at your local state things, look at Native voting organizations like Four Directions, women of color initiatives like She the Vote. And there's like just a bunch of different great things going on to help mobilize our community. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Aubrey. Thank you, Molly. I love you all. Thank you to American Community House and Tulsa Artists Fellowship.